Today is October the 21st. What good is the law? Let's find out together as we read the entire book of Galatians. Today, in reading through the Bible in a year, I'd like you to read the book of Galatians. It's not that long. It'll take you about 10 minutes to read through. And it gives you the chance to see Paul's argument from beginning to end. Now, when Paul writes one of the churches that he's founded, typically he'll say, I pray for you frequently, and I'm filled with such joy when I think about you. Well, when he writes the Galatians, in verse 6, he opens up by saying, I'm shocked. I'm dumbfounded when I think about you. He didn't have anything positive to say about the Galatians. So what was the issue? Well, if you look at chapter 2, verse 15 and 16, he says, you and I are Jews by birth, not sinners like the Gentiles. We know that a person is made right with God by faith in Jesus Christ, not by obeying the law. We believed in Christ Jesus so that we might be made right with God because of our faith in Christ, not because we have not because we have obeyed the law. For no one will ever be made right with God by obeying the law. Paul is driving this point home because apparently the Galatians, after accepting the gospel, many of them, if not all of them, decided to become Jewish as well. They decided to proselytize and attempt to obey the Old Testament law. Now, at first glance, you might think, well, that's not that big of a deal, is it? Paul says it absolutely is. Because Jesus came to change the way that we approach God. Jesus said we approach God by faith, not by obeying the law. And when you turn aside that faith and obey the law, seek to obey the law, you're actually changing the nature of the gospel, the nature of the way that you approach God. Paul's argument flows from his own life, where he grew up as a Pharisee, but came to meet the Lord, followed the new way of salvation, which focused on God's grace and faith. He then argues from the Old Testament that even in the Old Testament, the law was insufficient for salvation. We needed faith. Abraham had faith, and it was Abraham's faith that brought him salvation. Then he comes in the later chapters to talk more theologically about the difference between working for your salvation and simply accepting salvation as God gives it to us. We live today by the Spirit, not by the law. In the latter chapters, Paul rejects nomism, the idea that we work for our salvation, but he also rejects libertinism. He rejects the idea that what we do, our works, are insignificant. Paul says, oh no, they're very important. Where he lands is in chapter 3, verses 24 and 25. He said, let me put it another way. The law was our guardian until Christ came. It protected us until we could be made right with God through faith. Now that the way of faith has come, we no longer need the law as our guardian. The word guardian there is literally the Greek word pedagogue. The law is our pedagogue. The pedagogue was an individual in a Roman household who was charged with raising the children. The pedagogue was to teach them. They would learn to read and write through the pedagogue. But the pedagogue was also a moral guide. They would learn the difference between right and wrong through the pedagogue. Paul says the law is our pedagogue. It helps us to understand the difference between right and wrong. But once Christ comes, once we are full grown, we no longer need the pedagogue. We now have Christ to guide us. Like, follow, and subscribe to this devotional on whatever platform you use to listen to it. Email your questions to us at questions@becomehope.com. Enjoy this Sunday in the church of your choice.